The Valorians demanded we choose a champion, and the humans sent their cleaning woman. We were still laughing when she asked if we'd actually tried listening to each other. Commander Kael'thas stopped mid-sentence. The three-way transmission from Meridian 7's central conference chamber cut to static, then resumed with uncomfortable clarity. Every galactic representative now hearing what he'd said, now understanding the magnitude of the insult implicit in those words. According to YouTube analytics, 98% of viewers are not subscribed. That's a huge number. By subscribing the channel that is completely free, Emma Johnson didn't look up from her notepad. This was the problem, really. For 47 days, the Valorians, the Xanthorics, and the Corvani had screamed at each other across 200 square meters of polished station floor. For 47 days, master diplomats trained in 17 different negotiation protocols had deployed every stratagem in the Galactic Accords playbook. Sanctions had been threatened. Trade agreements had been weaponized. Military positions had been mapped with crushing precision, and 3 star systems were about to burn. The Corvani Collective's territorial claim on the Theron Belt had triggered Valorian military mobilization within hours. The Xanthoric sovereignty's counterclaim had brought weapons online. Resource denial protocols activated in sequence. Emergency protocols escalated hourly. The station's command center showed green status lights flickering to amber, then red, marking the steady advance toward open warfare. The humans had sent one woman with a maintenance uniform and a clipboard. Kael'thas knew the numbers, he always did. 3 habitable systems, 18 populated worlds, 280 million civilians in direct strike range. Military projections showed conflict escalation from first strike to total systemic collapse in approximately 72 hours. The Xanthorics had 3 dreadnoughts in attack position. The Corvani had mobilized their entire defensive fleet. The Valorians, his people, had sufficient firepower to end this decisively if the order came today, which it probably would. The Galactic Peace Accords protocols were clear. When diplomatic solutions failed, and they had, spectacularly, repeatedly, exhaustively failed, military intervention became not just authorized, but mandatory. The Council had voted. The order was already drafted. All that remained was for someone to press the authorization button, and 3 star systems problems would become permanently solved. Senior diplomat Azila sat to Kael'thas's left, her pale skin flushed with frustration. She'd been negotiating for 17 days. Her team had exhausted every trade possibility, every compromise framework, every incentive structure. 18 different proposals had been rejected. 12 more had been sabotaged by suspicious counterparties. We should initiate Article 7, Azila said quietly, which meant immediate military action. The civilians can be evacuated in 96 hours if we're efficient. Selar, the Xanthoric, representative, transmitted from his own delegation's private chamber. We've already calculated that scenario. Only 60% escape probability. The Corvani will attack the evacuation transports the moment they detect movement. The station's life support systems hummed with the weight of impossible choices. And in the corner, Emma Johnson turned a page in her notepad, took a sip of coffee, and wrote something down in handwriting so small Kael'thas had to wonder what possibly mattered enough to document in this moment. "Where did you acquire this specialist?" Azila asked, her inflection making the word an accusation. The human contingent's ambassador, Sarah Jackson, straightened slightly. She was small by comparative species standards. Most humans were, but her presence at the negotiating table had always carried disproportionate weight, as if confidence could be weaponized through sheer force of will. "Emma has experience resolving complex systems," Sarah said flatly. "She's a janitor," Kael'thas said. He said it like the word itself was a diagnosis. A janitor, sent to negotiate trade rights and territorial claims, sent to prevent the first true military conflict in 300 years, sent like some kind of elaborate joke at the coalition's expense. "She's currently repairing our station's infrastructure issues," Sarah said, "but her actual job is problem-solving." In the corner, Emma wrote something else down. Her coffee was getting cold. She didn't seem to notice or care. Zilar's transmission came through the primary channel, no encryption, deliberately allowing everyone to hear. This is insulting. This is intentional sabotage of the negotiation process. If the humans believe we're so incompetent that a maintenance worker can demonstrate our inadequacy. Which one are you? Emma's voice cut through the transmission like a blade through silk. The entire chamber went quiet. I'm sorry? Zilar's response carried genuine confusion. Emma finally looked up from her notepad. She had gray eyes, something Kael'thas had never properly noticed before, though she'd been sitting in that corner for 3 days now. She looked directly at the holographic projection of the Xanthoric representative. You're assuming I'm here to prove your incompetence, Emma said. Which one of you actually wants that to be true? Because that seems like the real conversation nobody's having. Kael'thas felt something in his certainty crack, like ice under unexpected pressure. The contradictions were stacking up now, and Emma was sitting at the center of them like a navigator reading stars. Here's what was supposed to happen. When crisis reached critical levels, authority figures with superior training and access to better information were supposed to solve problems. Kael'thas had graduated from the Valorian Strategic Institute. Azila had negotiated trade agreements between 17 different species. Zilar was a senior statesman from the Xanthoric sovereignty. Their combined experience spanned 700 years of successful diplomatic engagement. They had failed. Here's what was actually happening. A woman whose job was to clean station corridors was sitting quietly while the galaxy burned, writing down observations that made senior authorities nervous without understanding why. The Valorians keep threatening military intervention, Emma said, speaking to no one in particular, her tone conversational like she was mentioning weather patterns to a friend during a casual lunch break. But every time they do, the Xanthorics escalate security posture, which the Corvani interpret as aggressive positioning. Then the Corvani move their fleet, which the Valorians read as hostile action. And now everyone's convinced everyone else wants war, so everyone's preparing for war, which proves everyone else wanted war. It's elegant, actually. Very efficient cycle. That's standard military escalation response, Zilar said, but he sounded uncertain. When threats are issued, appropriate counterpositioning is mandatory protocol. Yeah, Emma said, returning to her notes. That's exactly what you all keep doing. That's what makes it work so well as a cycle. Kael'thas realized something in that moment that would reshape his understanding of confidence. Emma wasn't nervous. She wasn't impressed by titles, or threatened by military positioning, or worried about whether her observations would be accepted. She was calm the way someone is calm in the eye of a hurricane, not because the storm doesn't exist, but because she wasn't afraid of it. The aliens around her were terrified. They were just screaming louder than the fear sounded. We should probably talk about what you all actually want, Emma said to her coffee cup, instead of what you think you're supposed to want. But that's just a thought. She took another sip. The silence that followed was the loudest thing in the chamber. Do you even understand what's happening? Kael'thas said it quietly, which was worse than if he'd shouted. The commander leaned forward, holographic representation emphasizing the movement. 3-star systems, 200 million lives, military authorization pending in less than 18 hours. And you're taking notes like you're documenting a routine maintenance cycle. Emma looked up from her notepad. She smiled, not mockingly, not nervously, but with the patient expression of someone about to explain something obvious to someone who'd been looking in the wrong direction their entire life. Yeah, she said. I understand what's happening. That's kind of the problem. The problem, Kael'thas said slowly, is that you understand what's happening? The problem, Emma corrected, is that none of you understand what's happening. You're all solving for the wrong variables. She set down her pen with deliberate care. The sound of it hitting the table seemed impossibly loud in the sudden silence. Here's my deceptively simple question, Emma continued. If the Corvani Collective, the Zenthoric Sovereignty, and the Valorian Dominion all actually wanted to fight each other, why haven't you started fighting? You've had 47 days. You have the military superiority sorted out. You've identified targets. You've mobilized forces. You have every single objective condition for war. So why are you still here? Why are you still negotiating? Sealer's transmission cut through before anyone could answer, because we're attempting to find peaceful resolution. No, Emma interrupted. You're not. You're attempting to find resolution where you win and everyone else loses. That's not negotiation. That's hostage-taking with better vocabulary. She turned back to her notepad, wrote something, and looked back up. What do you each actually want that's not the other side capitulates? The silence was absolute. Kael'thas made a decision in that moment. A tactical decision. A strategic error of the highest magnitude, though he wouldn't understand this until much later. He asked Emma to explain her analysis. She did. The Valorians keep issuing military threats, Emma said, her tone still conversational, still dismissive of the cosmic stakes everyone else was drowning in. Every time you do, Zilar here becomes more convinced you're going to invade. So he hardens his defensive positions, which makes your analysis team more convinced he's planning first strike capability. So you issue stronger threats, and now you're caught in a loop where demonstrating military superiority just makes everyone more certain war is inevitable. Military superiority must be demonstrated, Azila said tightly. Otherwise, inferior forces become emboldened. Exactly, Emma said. You're right. Demonstrating superiority absolutely hardens the other side's resolve. That's why you've been failing for 47 days. Your solution is perfectly designed to prevent the outcome you want. Zilar's holographic representation flickered with what might have been frustration. Then what do you suggest? That we unilaterally withdraw military positioning, that we expose ourselves to... You're still thinking about this wrong, Emma said. You're thinking about military positioning as a communication tool. But what you're actually communicating is, I'm preparing for violence. Which triggers, we need to prepare for violence. It's not complicated. Kael'thas realized what was happening. The diplomatic team had tried the military pressure approach. It had escalated the crisis. So they'd pivoted to economic sanctions, cutting off the Corvani's access to critical resource markets, hoping financial pressure would force compliance. The Corvani had responded by forming alliance talks with the outer systems, effectively threatening to fragment the entire regional trade structure. So the coalition had proposed technical resource-sharing models, trying to make cooperation mathematically irresistible through sheer economic benefit calculation. The Corvani had rejected them as insulting attempts to redistribute their sovereign wealth. Each solution had been worse than the previous one because each solution had been based on forcing the other side to accept predetermined outcomes rather than discovering what the other side actually wanted. You've been asking the wrong question for 47 days, Emma said. You've been asking, how do we win? You should be asking, what do they actually need? Those are not the same question. Azila's hands were shaking. How is it possible that a maintenance specialist understands negotiation dynamics our entire diplomatic corps missed? Your diplomatic corps, Emma said gently, is trained to win. I'm trained to fix things. There's a difference. Sarah Jackson requested access to Emma's notes at 300 hours station time. What she found shattered every assumption about what had transpired over 3 days. Emma's observations filled 47 pages. Not 47 notes. 47 pages of dense, systematic documentation that mapped the psychological architecture underlying the entire crisis with the kind of precision that should have required teams of specialists weeks to develop. Page 1. Kael'thas's escalation pattern. Commander issued threat, then assessed response timing, then modified tone based on reciprocal threat level. The pattern repeated with mathematical regularity. Kael'thas wasn't trying to start a war. He was trying to establish dominance through measured escalation, expecting the other party to yield at some point when superiority became undeniable. Page 3. Sealar's defensive reinforcement. Each time Valorian threats increased, Xanthoric response came slightly faster, slightly more aggressive. Not because they wanted war, but because they were testing response times, establishing minimum acceptable deterrence. Sealar was trying to make himself unmissable as a threat, not because invasion seemed imminent, but because he needed proof the Xanthorics couldn't be intimidated. Page 7. The Corvani territorial claim. Sarah had read the official position papers. They were abstract discussions of resource rights and historical claims. Emma's notes contained something different. Emma had documented the 3-day pattern of silences, the moments when Corvani representatives seemed to hesitate before delivering prepared statements, the emphasis patterns in their speech when discussing cultural heritage versus economic advantage. The Corvani didn't actually want the Theron belt. They wanted acknowledgement that they'd existed long enough to claim it. They wanted to matter. In 3 days, she identified what you spent 47 days missing, Sarah said flatly, reviewing the documentation. Every diplomatic failure, every escalation trigger, every single misstep your teams made, she documented all of it. How? Azila's voice was hollow. She watched, Sarah said. She didn't participate. She didn't try to implement solutions. She just watched and listened and wrote down what was actually happening instead of what was supposed to be happening. Kael'thas felt his understanding of competence reorganizing itself in real time. The emergency transmission to the Valorian High Command wasn't encrypted. It didn't need to be. There is a human on station who has identified the negotiation failure parameters with complete accuracy in 72 hours. Kael'thas's report stated with military precision. Our diplomatic corps required 47 days to identify the wrong problem. She identified why we identified the wrong problem. Silence from high command. She's currently a maintenance specialist. Her job title is janitor. She has a psychology background that I can only assume Earth considers insufficient for professional diplomatic credentials. When I asked her credentials, she looked confused and asked if I wanted her equipment access codes. More silence. Sir, I'm requesting guidance. Has Earth been holding back intentionally? Are we negotiating with species that send experts to appear incompetent? The response from High Command took 90 seconds. 90 seconds where Kael'thas had to sit with the possibility that everything he understood about interspecies dynamics was inverted. Investigate whether human competence is intentional or accidental, the High Command finally answered. If intentional, escalate to council level immediately. If accidental, determine why we're less effective at our specialization than they are at maintaining infrastructure. Sealar had requested direct communication with the Xanthoric sovereignty hierarchy. His opening words were, "There is a possibility that humans have been outperforming us in our own field without apparent effort." Emma set down her coffee cup, the same cup, still holding cold coffee she hadn't bothered finishing, and looked directly at Kael'thas. "So here's my original question," she said. "Is this where I pretend I can't win?" The implication hung in the air like radiation. Is this where I pretend that human observation, human pattern recognition, human ability to understand what's actually happening instead of what's supposed to be happening is somehow less than what you've been offering? Is this where I pretend that 47 days of failure is somehow more credible than 3 days of clarity? Is this where I accept the hierarchical structure that says military authority understands crisis better than someone who fixes broken systems? Kael'thas understood in that moment that Emma had known she could solve this from the beginning. She'd just been waiting to see if they would solve it themselves. They hadn't. They wouldn't have. They needed her. And she needed them to realize that humans didn't need their protocols to succeed. Or, Emma said quietly, we could actually try something different. Emma set down her coffee cup. the cold one, still half full, untouched for hours, and leaned back in her chair like she was about to explain something tedious to someone who should have already understood it. "Okay," she said, her tone the exact conversational register of someone explaining why you needed to turn off a device and turn it back on again. "Let me walk through this." She pulled out her notes, flipped to a specific page, and spoke without looking at them, which meant she'd already internalized the architecture of 3 species failures. "You all keep fighting about resource distribution. The Valorians want control of the Theron Belt's heavy metals. The Xanthorics want processing rights. The Corvani want territorial acknowledgement. But here's the thing, nobody actually asked what resources they each need versus what they want. You've been negotiating over desires instead of requirements." Azila started to respond. Emma held up a hand. "Also, Commander Kael'thas, you threatened their holy world yesterday. That's why the Corvani won't talk to you directly anymore. Not because they're aggressive, because you told them you could destroy something they consider sacred. That's not a negotiating position, that's a declaration that you're willing to commit cultural genocide if they don't cooperate." Kael'thas's holographic representation flickered with something that looked like genuine shock. "The Xanthorics don't trust the Valorians," Emma continued, "because you keep lying about the supply numbers. Every proposal you've submitted has contained deliberately inflated projections about what's available. You've been caught 3 times. Yet you keep lying. Weird that you never thought to stop lying and see if honesty might work better than documented deception." She took a sip of her cold coffee and grimaced. "This tastes like regret." "What are you saying?" Sylar asked carefully. "I'm saying," Emma replied, "that you've made the basic human error of all sophisticated species. You're so focused on winning that you forgot to try actually solving the problem." The realization spread through the chamber like cascading system failures. Azila's face went pale, pale even for a Valorian. "You're suggesting our entire negotiation framework was predicated on deception." "Yes," Emma said flatly. "Calculated dishonesty as a strategy, which works great when everyone accepts that negotiations are essentially warfare by different means. Except the Xanthorics noticed you were lying, and once they knew you were lying, they couldn't trust anything you said. So every subsequent offer, no matter how legitimate, was interpreted through the lens of, the Valorians are trying to deceive us." Sylar transmitted from his secure chamber. "The Valorians threatened our colony worlds, claimed they were strategically indefensible, which was mathematically false. We verified their claims using independent analysis. They were lying about our vulnerability." "Yeah," Emma said, "that's what I'm telling you. The Xanthoric's intransigence wasn't irrational. It was the perfectly logical response to documented dishonesty. You kept lying. They kept not trusting you, so neither of you could actually negotiate because you were both operating from incompatible baselines of what was true." She turned to the Corvani delegation. "And you all, the third faction wasn't actually interested in the Theron Belt's resources. You wanted acknowledgement of territorial rights. You wanted the other species to recognize that you existed long enough to claim something. You wanted to matter in the hierarchy." The Corvani representative transmitted, "The Valorians have systematically excluded us from resource decisions for 40 years. "Which is a completely different problem than resource distribution," Emma said. "That's a political status problem. You can't solve political status with resource distribution agreements. You need to solve it by treating the Corvani like they're part of the decision-making apparatus instead of supplicants begging for scraps." The cosmic implications crystallize simultaneously across 3 different communication networks. All 3 species could satisfy each other's actual requirements. The Valorians needed heavy metals, the Theron Belt had them. The Xanthorics needed processing capability and trade access. They could provide that. The Corvani needed acknowledgement and political equity. They could receive that at 0 cost to anyone else. Every single expert had been optimizing for political victory instead of actual resolution. They'd been solving the wrong problem on purpose. Kael'thas made the obvious decision. He requested Emma's methodology. She laughed, actually laughed, at the request. Methodology, Emma repeated like the word was absurd. You want me to explain my methodology for solving this? Yes, Kael'thas said. Your approach, your framework, your... I ask questions and listen to the answers, Emma said. That's it. That's the methodology. I don't have a formal protocol. I don't have a security clearance framework that prevents me from discussing actual concerns. I don't have rank structures that require me to make proposals that align with political position instead of actual needs. I'm not trained to see every negotiation as a strategic victory condition. She gestured broadly at the chamber. Your diplomatic channels were designed for complex problem-solving within predetermined parameters. Those channels are inadequate for actual human observation, because human observation means listening without trying to predict where this benefits you most. Your security clearance requirements prevent actual information sharing, because classified negotiations require everyone to lie about baseline facts. Your formal protocols prevent honest conversation, because protocols exist to prevent exactly that. Honest, unstructured, solution-focused dialogue. Your command structures prevent creative solutions because creative solutions might threaten someone's political authority. Azila said quietly, You're saying our systems are designed to prevent what we were actually trying to achieve. I'm saying, Emma corrected, that your systems are designed to win, and winning and solving are different objectives. I worked outside every system because I didn't even know the systems existed. Nobody told me about the clearance protocols or the formal procedures or the rank-based decision-making. I just asked obvious questions. She set down her notes. If I'd known about your systems, I probably would have failed too, would have been constrained by the same parameters you're all operating under. But I didn't know, so I was free to be useful. The silence that followed was the kind that preceded paradigm shifts. Sealer's transmission was directed to senior Xanthoric leadership. If this approach functions at station-level diplomatic crisis, it potentially functions everywhere. Kael'thas was making the connection in real time. Intergalactic conflicts might be solvable by humans simply ignoring our protocols and asking basic questions. Emma watched the realization spread with faint amusement. She sipped her cold coffee again, grimaced again, and set it down with the permanent resignation of someone who should have replaced it hours ago. The human approach, she said, observing the implications, is ask what people need, listen, identify actual problems, solve those problems. The alien approach is establish position, apply power, threaten consequences, enforce hierarchy. You're not actually incompatible. You're just solving different problems. Humans solve the actual problem. You solve the power problem, and you can't do both simultaneously. Authority figures across 3 species were contacting their highest leadership levels. The question was no longer, how do we negotiate this? The question had become, what have we been wrong about this entire time? Kael'thas realized, with the kind of clarity that precedes either institutional adaptation or catastrophic institutional collapse, that military advantage was irrelevant to this problem. He had superior firepower. It was absolutely useless. It had actually made things worse because it had communicated threat when communication had been required. Azila understood simultaneously that their sophistication, 40 years of diplomatic training, 17 negotiation protocols, advanced understanding of strategic positioning had created blindness. They were so focused on complex solutions that they'd missed simple ones. Sealer confronted the possibility that complexity had obscured the solutions it was designed to reveal. Their entire civilization prided itself on technical sophistication. That sophistication had prevented them from asking the basic questions that would have solved this. Coalition leadership was in emergency session, questioning what else they'd been solving wrong, how. Many intergalactic conflicts had been perpetuated by their own protocols? How many crises had they made worse by applying frameworks designed for victory rather than resolution. Emma watched the realization spread across three species leadership, like watching someone finally understand why their complicated machine didn't work, because it was designed to do the opposite of what it was supposed to do. She grabbed a fresh cup of coffee. This one was still hot. Sarah Jackson requested private transmission access at 0415 hours. When Kael'thas received the encrypted message, the first line made everything reorganize itself in his understanding. Emma wasn't sent as an observer. She was sent as a last resort. The revelation continued with brutal honesty. The human contingent had known with certainty that approached mathematical proof, that all existing diplomatic approaches had failed. They understood that human distance from alien politics, human immunity to the established power structures, human lack of investment in the hierarchical outcomes, gave them unique perspective that insiders could never achieve. Emma's mundane approach wasn't actually mundane. It was standard human problem-solving methodology. The humans had been solving similar crises for millennia through simple dialogue because human survival had always depended on communication rather than dominance. Humans had no historical precedent for sophisticated hierarchical structures that prevented honest conversation. They'd never had the luxury. Kael'thas understood. Emma had been sent because she represented everything the Valorians, Xenthorics, and Corvani had trained out of themselves. She represented actual problem-solving capability, uncorrupted by the need to maintain position. The realization cascade continued through emergency council sessions across three species leadership hierarchies. Azila presented the analysis to Valorian High Command. Complexity breeds blindness. We constructed such elaborate negotiation systems, such sophisticated frameworks for understanding strategic positioning, that we became incapable of seeing simple solutions. Our sophistication was our limitation. The High Command's response was measured. Explain. When you're trained to see 17 different layers of strategic maneuvering in every statement, Azila said, you can't hear simple honesty. When every word is calibrated for political positioning, you can't recognize a person who's just describing what's actually happening. Our system was designed to win political victory. It was not designed to solve problems. Zilar transmitted similar conclusions to Xenthoric leadership. Hierarchy prevented honest communication. Everyone in our negotiation team was performing for position. Nobody could admit confusion without jeopardizing rank. Nobody could change position without losing face. Nobody could ask basic questions without appearing incompetent. The structure that was supposed to maximize our effectiveness actually prevented it. The Corvani representative added the final piece. Posturing prevented listening. We were so focused on demonstrating our strength, our validity, our right to be heard, that we never actually shut up long enough to hear what others needed. Fear of being exploited prevented vulnerability. And without vulnerability, you can't actually negotiate. You can only threaten. Emma had brought something that none of them possessed. Outsider perspective unclouded by these ancient patterns of interaction. She hadn't been trained to perform for position. She didn't have career advancement depending on political victories. She wasn't afraid of being exploited because she had nothing to defend. She was just solving problems. Emma facilitated the first honest conversation in 47 days. She didn't negotiate. She asked questions. In separate meetings, Valorians first, then Xenthorics, then Corvani, she sat across from each species' representatives and asked them to describe what they actually needed. Not what they wanted, not what their position required, what they actually needed to move forward. The Valorians needed heavy metals for manufacturing expansion, specific compounds from the Theron Belt's lower mantle deposits. Nothing else mattered. They'd been posturing about territorial control because their leadership demanded a political victory, but the actual requirement was simple resource acquisition. The Xenthorics needed processing capability and reliable trade access. They couldn't refine the ore themselves. Their industrial infrastructure was designed for different applications. They needed a partner. They'd been demanding control because control meant security. But what they actually needed was a guarantee that supply wouldn't be cut off for political reasons. The Corvani needed to be treated as equals. They needed the other species to acknowledge that they had valid claims, valid perspectives, valid voices in collective decision-making. They didn't need the Theron Belt's resources. They needed not to be invisible. In a combined session, 3 species in the same chamber for the first time without screaming, Emma asked a single question. So if the Valorians got mining rights, the Xanthorics got processing contracts, and the Corvani got equal representation in all future agreements about this region, would everyone be satisfied? Silence. Then Kael'thas said, "Yes." Xelar confirmed, "Yes." The Corvani representative, "Yes." "Great," Emma said. "That took 4 hours. You've been fighting for 47 days about something that solved in 4 hours once you actually asked what people needed instead of what they should want." She wrote the agreement framework on the station's standard form. 3-star systems entered an era of unprecedented cooperation before the sun set that day. Kael'thas stood before the Valorian High Command's holographic presence and acknowledged a truth that military training had never prepared him for. "Military solution wasn't necessary," he said flatly. "My advantage was irrelevant. My superiority was useless. What was required was honesty, not dominance." The High Command didn't respond immediately. Kael'thas waited for the recrimination. It didn't come. Instead, acknowledge this. "Move forward." Azila made a similar statement to the Valorian diplomatic corps. "Superior sophistication created inferior outcomes. We trained ourselves to see complexity that didn't exist. We created solutions for problems we invented instead of solving problems that were actually present." She paused then. "We need to untrain ourselves." Xelar made his statement before the Xanthoric Council. Human simplicity outperformed our complexity, not because humans are more intelligent, because they weren't constrained by the systems we thought made us effective. That's a different kind of problem. That's a structural problem. The coalition leadership voted unanimously to dissolve existing diplomatic protocols and begin new framework development. The senior council voted unanimously to officially adopt human methodology for future conflicts, which meant ask questions, listen, identify actual needs, solve actual problems, stop posturing. The revolutionary simplicity of it was almost unbearable. Emma wrote the principles on the back of her lunch break notes because that's what she had available. 3 lines. Simple statements, the foundation of revised interspecies relations. Ask what people actually need before deciding for them. Listen without planning your response. If the complicated solution requires everyone to lie, try an honest one. Kael'thas had them transcribed into formal documentation. The High Council reviewed them 3 times. They were so simple that the Council kept waiting for the complexity to appear. It never did. These became official Galactic Accord guidelines, printed on every diplomatic credential, required reading for every new negotiator, posted in every conference chamber across every space station in the known systems. 3-star systems entered their first year of unprecedented cooperation. Trade routes flourished. Cultural exchange programs began. Resource sharing became standardized instead of weaponized. And somewhere in the bureaucratic machinery of interspecies relations, Emma Johnson's 3 principles became the foundation upon which the next 3 centuries of galactic peace were built. She had no idea